Former President Jimmy Carter will be honored at a state funeral today in Washington. Joining us right now is Stuart Eizenstat. He was the chief domestic policy advisor in the Carter White House. He later served as ambassador to the European Union and deputy Treasury Secretary in the Clinton administration. He is eulogizing the late president later this morning. Ambassador Eizenstat, thank you, first of all, for joining us this morning. I was hoping you could take us back to when you first met President Jimmy Carter.
Thank you. It's nice to be on your program. I watch it very frequently. I actually first met him in 1969 when I had gone back from the White House of LBJ, where I came and then was on Humphrey's presidential campaign in '68. And I met him in very inauspicious ways. That is, he was in an office in a building called the Hurt Building, with the only furniture being a folding table and two metal folding chairs. And he came in to the office in Atlanta with work boots and khaki pants. And I said to myself, what am I doing here? Is this guy got any chance of being governor? It took 2 meetings to convince me that he could bridge the urban-rural gap that we have in Georgia. He was a farmer from the deepest part of the South Georgia, who understood urban problems. He supported mass transit. He was moderate on civil rights. He wanted to reorganize the government. He supported stronger state funding of education. So I was his policy director then. I was his policy director in his presidential campaign from '74 to '76, and then 4 years in the hot house of the White House.
Why don't we talk a little bit about President Carter's economic legacy? It's something that people are looking back and trying to dig through. Obviously, he dealt with raging inflation. He dealt with much higher energy prices. But he put a lot of pieces in place that he may not always get credit for. You want to walk through what you think of as his economic legacy?
Thank you for giving me that opportunity. He lost in 1980 to Ronald Reagan overwhelmingly because of what I call 3 I's. Inter-party warfare with the liberal wing of the party, inflation and interest rates, and the Iran hostage issue. On the economic issues, he was certainly punished. But the important thing, Becky, is that he laid a foundation that made it much more innovative, gave us a much more competitive economy. And you don't have to take my word for it. Conservative Senator Phil Gramm from Texas wrote a beautiful op-ed article in a Wall Street Journal saying on his 100th birthday of Jimmy Carter that he put in place the deregulation of natural gas and crude oil, which has made us energy secure, led us to be the greatest producer of oil and gas, put in place the renewable energy and conservation ethic that we have today, putting a solar panel on the White House, and critically, he deregulated every major transportation industry. Airlines bringing air travel to the middle class. When he came in, 50% of the public had never gone on an airplane. Today, 90% do. He deregulated railroads and trucks, which made supply chains much more efficient. He deregulated telecommunications, which made possible something like CNBC. It really gave way to the cable era. He even deregulated the beer industry, leading to local craft industry. So this is one important legacy he left. And on inflation,
that was to help Billy. That was to help Billy, Stu.
Billy beer?
That was to help Billy.
Well, it didn't. But
no, you're right.
But it's important to know what he did on inflation, because this clearly was an Achilles heel, and there's no way around it. We had double-digit inflation. We had double-digit interest rates. But that came largely because of the second oil shock in the 1970s. President Nixon also had double-digit inflation. So how did we deal with inflation? First of all, the president genuinely was one of the first people in the White House to recognize that this was our number one problem. He gave a national television speech in 1978 saying this was our number one problem. Number two, we had 2 anti-inflation czars. We had wage and price guidelines. We had a labor management advisory report. None of them worked, including a very low budget deficit. Now, I really want to drive this home. He was a fiscal conservative. Our budget deficits were 2.6% of GDP. much lower than Reagan's, and God knows much lower than today. So that didn't help either. But here's what did. July 1979, inflation is raging. He tried all these other things and nothing worked. And he said, I'm not going to let inflation be my legacy to the American people. And over the objection, and I assure you, I'm not exaggerating, of every one of his advisors, he decided to appoint Paul Volcker to head the Federal Reserve, knowing in advance, because Paul told him in the Oval Office he was going to choke inflation out of the system by high interest rates. And he said, Mr. President, this is going to mean in your re-election year, you're going to have a very difficult economy. We won't have whipped inflation yet. We're going to have potentially higher unemployment. And the president said, Paul, you take care of the economy. I'll take care of the politics. And in fact, as we all know, Volcker succeeded, wildly exceeded anybody's expectations. Inflation dropped like a rock, but only after Carter's defeat in Reagan's first 2 years. And ever since, it's been there. So he really, even there, put in place something that we've lived with in a major way, that is lower inflation. He wasn't the beneficiary of it, but he created the foundation of it. And that plus deregulation. And deregulation, I mean, of energy as well as major sectors of the economy, really was a positive economic legacy, but it didn't occur in time to benefit him for his reelection.
And he pushed back against a lot of the left. What you just described, Stu, I hate to tell you, deregulation, not wanting to spend a lot of money. Maybe he was in the wrong party, Stu.
Joe, you're absolutely right. And in fact, he had as much problems with his own party as he did with the Republicans. In fact, we had regular leadership breakfasts with Republicans, and we had regular leadership breakfasts with Democrats. And he said to me personally, and I put this in my book, President Carter, the White House years, he said, Stu, I feel more comfortable on budget issues with the Republicans than I do with the Democrats. The Democratic Party at that time was looking for a second great society. There had been 8 years of Republicans, and now they had a Democratic president who they thought was going to build on the Great Society. But it came at a time of already high inflation. We inherited that from Presidents Nixon and Ford. And so he was constantly battling with the liberal wing of the party to get tighter budgets, and he achieved that, but at some political cost. In fact, one of the reasons, again, we lost the election was because Ted Kennedy ran against him. Yeah. He wanted cradle to grave national health insurance, which would have been, of course, very expensive. And that split the party and really helped lead to our defeat.
Stu, I know you took legal pads to every meeting that you ever had with the president, that you had such a long relationship before he was even governor of Georgia, and that formed the basis of that 2018 book you wrote. We really appreciate you joining us this morning. You're sharing some of these issues with us, and we'll be watching later today with your eulogy. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
We appreciate it.